And so while we have kind of a singular construction to the universe, a physical material one, the ancients had this three-tiered, three-level construction to the universe. Humans could not naturally go down to the netherworld, and they could not naturally go up into heaven. Now, the dead could come up to earth. This was generally considered very bad. And the gods could come down to earth from heaven. This was generally considered good. And it was that last one that is most connected to our understanding of idols. Because the idea was that you wanted the god to come down from heaven and live in your city. And so, ancient cities would build massive, incredibly decorated and artistic complexes to entice the god to come down and live with them. In Mesopotamia, which is in modern-day Iraq and Iran, they would build these huge pyramid-like staircases called ziggurats for the god to ascend from the sky, from the heaven, down the stairs to, at the bottom, a very big house called a temple. Temple, and again, the ancient languages, temple and palace are the same word. And so they would construct these palaces for the gods, and they would make them as nice as they possibly could, so that the god would say, this is a nice place to live. I'll change addresses and live here with you. He lives with the people. Now the people get the blessing that comes with the presence of the god living among them. So, let's say that a city has done all of this. They built their stairway to heaven, or down from heaven. They built their wonderful palace, and somehow they've managed to entice the god to come live with them. How are they going to interact with the god? The god is this kind of nebulous spirit thingy. So what do they need to be able to talk to the god, to interact with the god, to get to know the god? Well, the god needs a body, obviously. And that's what an idol essentially is. It's the body of the god. So what they do is they would craft very carefully, very delicately, the best possible body they could imagine for the god. It would be one that was symbolic, that made concrete the abstract thoughts of the god, the abstract attributes of the god. The god would be tall, powerful, muscularly built, if he was a guy. He would have his special emblems, like a lightning bolt or a calf. If it was a female god or goddess, she was very beautiful. And depending on what she was the goddess of, certain attributes would be emphasized over others to symbolize those particular abilities of the goddess. She'd have a tree of life with her, or ibex, or sword, if she was a goddess of war. They would make this body for the god to symbolize the deity as best they could in a concrete way. Now, this statue still was not the god. And it still wasn't even an idol yet. It was a human creation. It was tainted by the mortal touch. So what happens now is that they would go through a very complex rituals to purify the idol of all human taint. My favorite particularly being the mouth-washing ritual, which is where they would quite literally wash the idol's mouth out with a very bizarre concoction of herbs and spices and wines and beers and water and so on and so forth. They would wash out the mouth of the idol, purify it from human taint, set it up in the throne room of the god's palace, and now the god would come in, inhabit the body that has been made for it, and now the statue is an idol. But we have to make a very clear distinction. The idol is not the god. It is the body of the god. It is where the essence and presence of the god is housed, but the idol itself is not the god. If we were to jump in a time machine and be teleported back to ancient Mesopotamia or ancient Canaan, and we would ask the people, since we now know their language, is this idol your god? They would say, of course not, silly. It's just where the god is. The idea is that now this idol, this body made by humans for the god, has now allowed the god to interact with the people on earth. And so it will wear clothes, as one does. It will eat, it will drink, it will do other things. It will even, in some cases that are more bizarre from my taste, it will even preside over court cases as the presence of the God literally incarnate. Think of it this way. The idol was like a divine version of Skype. Okay? So, most of us here have used Skype, the wonderful video conferencing, video chatting service that we can do on our computers and talk to people face to face from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. So if I am sitting and talking with a friend on Skype, Skype is not my friend, okay? Now, I see my friend's image in the computer screen. I hear my friend's voice from the speakers. I talk to my friend through the computer's microphone. But the computer and the Skype program are not actually my friend. My friend is somewhere else hundreds of miles away. However, my friend's presence, his essence, if you will, is encapsulated in the Skype program via my computer. It is the medium through which I interact with and communicate with my friend. So in a very real sense, my friend's presence and essence is there in the computer, in Skype, with me. And in a very real sense, he is not. However, I would never confuse Skype and my friend as being, in fact, the same thing. Does the difference kind of make sense now? That's how an idol would work. It was the medium through which the God would manifest his or her presence to his people. Just like Skype is not my friend, the idol was not the God. But just as Skype is the conduit for my friend's presence and essence to be with me, so an idol was the conduit through which the essence and presence of the God was with his or her people. This is why people worshipped and bowed down to idols. They weren't worshiping the idol. They were worshiping the God whose essence and presence was manifest in the idol. This may sound bizarre to us because of how we've been raised and the society we've grown up in, but if you stop and think about it for a few minutes, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's a way for the deities, the gods, to communicate with their people in a very real, tangible way. So which leads the question, wait a minute, why wouldn't God, the real true God, why wouldn't he want us to make an idol, an avatar, if you will, for him, so that he can manifest his presence among us and communicate with us, interact with us? Well, the answer is because, well, he did. Us. And then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And let him rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and all that creeps along the ground and the livestock of the earth. And so God made man in his image. In his likeness he created him. Male and female he made them. This is idol language. The Hebrew word for image, tselem, is used elsewhere in the Old Testament to refer to physical idols. It's Akkadian, a Semitic language used by the Assyrians and Babylonians, very similar to Hebrew, has a cognate word, tsalamu, which is also used for idols and images of the deity. Let's think of the creation story of humanity in Genesis 2. What does God do? He forms an image, a body, out of the dust. And then he breathes into the nostrils, through the face, the breath of life, and it becomes a living being. This is how you make an idol. You form the image, you purify it through the face, and then the essence, the presence of the deity comes into it, and then boom, is a living idol. At creation, God made literally living, breathing idols of himself. We are now God made us to be the manifestations of his presence on earth. Now again, don't misunderstand it. Just as the idol is not the God, we are not God. But God made us to be the manifestations of his presence, his essence here on earth. Now, this idea that people were made in the image of God was not actually unique to the Israelites in the ancient world. Other people were referred to as being made in the image of God. Almost exclusively, all of these people are kings. Pharaoh in Egypt, for example, the Egyptians took that to a whole new level. Not only was Pharaoh made in the image of Horus, Pharaoh was the reincarnation of Horus. In this case, Pharaoh actually was God, which for some reason did not stop him from being assassinated, but neither here nor there. In Assyria and Mesopotamia, again, kings were described as being made in the image of God. Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, for example, was told that he is the perfect likeness of God. We see this reflected in their artwork. If you do a Google search of various Assyrian kings, whether Sargon II or Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, Ashurbanipal, so on and so forth, you will find something very odd. They all look the same, like exactly the same. If you go down to downtown Chicago to the Oriental Institute, where they have a tremendous amount of artwork from ancient Assyria, you will see the same thing. All the kings, they all look the same. Now, if you also Google, what does Ashur, the chief god of the Assyrian pantheon, who lends his name to the Assyrian people, if you Google a picture of him, you'll find that he looks exactly like all these Assyrian kings. So one of two options are left for us. Either these guys don't actually look like how they're portrayed, or somehow the ancient Assyrians managed to perfect cloning. I'm going to go with option A. The Assyrians, in their artwork, are presenting an idea rather than simply reproducing what people actually look like. Their kings, in their artwork, are literally in the image of God. From their curly hair, to their beards, to their clothes, their swords, their ridiculous muscles, they all look exactly like the god Ashur. Again, this doesn't mean they all looked this way. They probably didn't. But they were communicating the idea that their kings had the power of the god, the attributes of the god, from wisdom, justice, mercy, which they didn't use very often, but it was an attribute of God, strength and power. In their campaign records, they say again and again, by the power of Ashur in my arm, I smote so-and-so and their cousins and so on and so forth. But also, they carried the authority of the god. They ruled because they were in the image of God. And that gave them the right to make laws, to dispense justice, to conquer nations. All of this was done because they were in the image of God. And finally, it gave them the responsibility of the God. They were there to preserve order. They were there to exercise dominion over the earth. They were there to preserve justice, and they were there to continue the God's work of creation. We have to understand that in the ancient mind, creation was not making something out of nothing. Creation was bringing order out of chaos. Order started wherever the God was located, and then things became progressively chaotic as you worked your way out. Now, anyone who has studied ancient history will have noticed pretty quickly that most of these ancient powers are very obsessive about conquering. Certainly this was done for economic reasons, for greed and wealth, but there was a strong theological drive to their conquest. It wasn't just to gain resources. It was to continue the work of the God in creating order. Every new territory they conquered, every new kingdom that they smote, was a new land that they brought under the umbrella of their God and therefore brought into order. They were theologically driven to conquer, to continue the work of creation. Let's think back to Genesis 1. And God blessed them, and God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over everything, from the fish of the sea to the birds of the sky, to the livestock that walk across the earth." It's the same language, and it's the same idea. God created a perfect world, but He also left it empty and unfinished. And He left it to us to be His agents of creation, to complete creation, to bring order from chaos. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over. This is what it means to be created in the image of God. This is what God was creating when He created you and I. He was creating people, individuals, who would be His conduits to all of the rest of creation. We would bear His essence and His presence wherever we go, whatever we do. We come with the authority that God granted us to continue the work of creation, to bring order out of chaos, to bring harmony from discord. And we have the responsibility to do that. We bear the attributes of God, we bear the authority of God on earth, and we bear the responsibility that comes with that. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we are introducing people to God. The question is, what kind of God are we introducing them to? Are we living up to our responsibility and introducing them to the true God? The God of love, of peace, of joy. The God who created this world, who redeemed this world. Or by our actions, by our attitudes, by what we do, are we horribly misrepresenting God to everyone we meet? Do our actions aid in the creation and restoration of this world? Are we bringing shalom? Are we bringing peace? Things as they ought to be to whatever little tiny corner of the world we're at? Or are we furthering chaos, disharmony, and discord? This is what it means to be in the image of God. This is the responsibility that comes with it. Again, we are not God. But we are given His essence. Why do you think Paul calls us the body of Christ? It wasn't just a cute turn of phrase. There is a literalness to that. Just as the idol was the conduit for the idol and the kings were the conduit for the gods to work and move and act in the world, we are God's conduit to move, to act, to breathe, and live in this world. God works through us. God meets people through us. This is why we gather together to worship. True worship cannot be done in isolation. Do we uphold the image of God in us? Do we take that responsibility? Yes, it comes with awesome honor and awesome power and authority, but it comes with tremendous responsibility for how we live every moment of every day. Do we understand that responsibility? Do we take it seriously? And for many of us, it can seem to be too much. And it is. I mean, how many of us, the answer is all of us, but how many of us have messed this up? How many of us have misrepresented God? How many of us have pushed people away from meeting the God who they're supposed to meet through us? It seems like way too much for any one of us to do. But this is what God literally made us for. And if God made us to be His image, His mode of interacting and working in the world, then He will certainly make us able to live up to that responsibility. After all, when Moses challenged God saying, "Who am I?" God responded, "Who made man's mouth? Who makes the blind see, the dumb speak? Is it not I, Yahweh?" He's saying the same thing to every single one of us. I made you to be my image. I made you to carry my essence and presence to everyone you meet. Through you, I will shine out in this world. And you may not think you're up to it. You may not think you're capable of it, but that's what I made you for. So trust that I know what I'm doing when I make you. This is who we are. And this is what it means to follow the second commandment. To make a graven image, to set up an idol, is to shirk that responsibility. It is to deny the image that God placed in every single one of us and pass that to someone or something else. It is to deny who God made us to be and what God made us to be. That's how we break the second commandment. So may you be the image of God in this world. May you have the faith to trust that God will perfect Himself, or rather, perfect His demonstration of who He is through you. May God shine through you as He made you to shine. And may you be His perfectly fashioned idol of Himself.